Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder as I head out for a walk and deliver an episode to you while I stroll around. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good morning, listeners. It is a lovely day. Lovely. It is a day here in suburban Chicago. It's kind of cloudy and gloomy. It was so funny. I looked out and I wasn't even sure whether I wanted to take this walk this morning because the clouds are quite oppressive. And so I asked our Google Home Hub whether it was going to rain today, and it said, no, it's going to rain tomorrow, but not today. Oh, that's wild. And I looked out and it sure looked like it was going to rain. And I said, are you sure it's not going to rain, Google? And it said, nope, not going to rain today. And then my wife checked her phone and that weather thing said not going to rain either. Well, I'm walking in. I guess it's feels like a little bit of a hail, but it's effectively rain. I journey out into this chilly weather, this rainy weather. It's not rain, with the endeavor of recording for you a second time an episode of the podcast. And actually, I guess this would be the second recording of an episode. The second time I've second recorded an episode, right? Because the last episode I had to record twice because the first time I recorded it, the microphone was dead. And then so I recorded it again. Well, this episode I recorded yesterday using the same method as the second recording of the previous episode, in which I hold the phone in my hand. But it was very blustery and windy yesterday, and I listened to about 3 minutes of the episode, and it sounded like I was in a wind tunnel. And while I don't pride myself on the audio quality of this podcast, I also don't want my listeners to get a headache or turn off in disgust, and it was pretty bad. So I had to scrap that recording, which means I'm recording again, an old episode, or a second take on an episode. So without further ado, here it is, my re-recording of episode 428 of the Pick Up and Deliver podcast, shooting from the hip, triple shot. So for those of you who are new to the podcast, shooting from the hip is a feature I do in which I offer brief reflections on games I played for the first time recently. The idea is to give you a first impressions or first look of a game. It's not an in-depth review. It's just, I tried this game. Here's what I thought of it on my first play, and probably whether I'll go back for another. So I have 3 games to talk to you about today. All 3 were played at the Toggle Gaming Club about a week ago. Not 2 days ago. So I guess 10 days ago or so. And here they are. The first one is a collaborative party game called Mental Blocks. This was donated to Toggle Game Club by one of our regular members, Steve James. And I'm glad to have it in our collection. It's an interesting little game. In Mental Blocks, each player, there's a series of packets of cards that are all connected, kind of like Spyfall, if you ever played that. And when you play, you open up the packet and give each person one of the cards. The card has on it either a grayscale or black and white drawing of a shape, a sort of weird architectural shape, or it has a color rendering of a weird architectural shape, but it's in 2 dimensions and from one of the 4 cardinal directions. There might also be one from above, I don't know. We only ever played with 4 people, so we didn't get into the cards that you get if you have like 6 or 7 people. The way the game works, each person gets one of these cards, and then there is a selection of very dense foam pieces in white, blue, yellow, or black. And those dense foam pieces come in a variety of shapes, widths and lengths, and so on. And each player has a partial view of the shape. I guess you could sort of talk about it like The Blind Man and the Elephant, the board game. If you know that parable, the idea that several blind men are standing around an elephant and they each reach forward and end up grabbing a different part of the elephant and then describe the elephant as having those characteristics. So the one who grabs the trunk describes the elephant one way, the one who grabs the tail describes it another, one who grabs the leg describes it a third way. And so the idea is that if you're each seeing a different part of a thing, then the overall effect is muddled. And what you have to do is make the shape that fits everyone's observations. That's basically it. So there is, like I said, it's collaborative. There's no turns or anything. People just start making things. And what we found generally is that one person would sort of build the shape to fit what they see. And then one by one, people would kind of add in what they saw, and we would move around until we kind of got it right. two things that make it especially interesting or complex. One is that you don't get any orientation between your cards and anyone else's cards. So, I might have if you put it on a north, south, east, west grid, I might have the north face on my card and you might have the east face, but we have nothing on our cards that tells us the relationship between the two cards. So a big part of it is to start figuring out, well, which side do I have and how does my side correspond to what other people have? And then negotiating, figuring out, especially in the 2D images, like, okay, I see a black square here, but maybe the black square isn't on the same plane as this white square. So that sort of thing. It was an interesting game, really fun. We played maybe 3 or 4 rounds in escalating difficulty. There's a timer you're supposed to use, which we found was far longer than we needed most of the time. That's pretty good. Pretty simple. I would say for experienced gamers, it's probably too simple to be a sustained long-term fun activity, but good introductory game, interesting cooperative game, really nice aesthetic. It looks pretty on the table and it's fun to play that way. So I would recommend, if you get a chance, to try out Mental Blocks, but probably not buy it. All right, the second game I wanted to talk about, I got to try, was the Night Cage. This was taught to us by my friend Stephen James, the one who donated Mental Blocks to the Game Club. It was donated to the Game Club by the Game Club's sponsor, XYZ Game Labs, who, as a reminder, I work with them. And so if you see some sort of conflict of interest there, that's what it is. XYZ Game Club, or Game Labs, has a library of games they use for research, and they ended up having 2 copies of the Night Cage in their library, so they donated one to Toggle. And Toggle, of course, appreciates it. So the Night Cage has an interesting premise. You are four miscellaneous travelers who have been imprisoned in some sort of mystical, otherworldly prison. You have been released from your cages, but you're in this sort of surreal underground cavern, or surreal underground tunnel system, and each of you has a single candle to light your way. Now, as you go along, you're crawling through the tunnels and you're trying to find keys that will allow you to escape, and you're trying to find the doorway through which you can use the key to escape. The game is played, it's pretty simple. You start on a starting space, and you can kind of put that starting space wherever you want in comparison to the other players. There are advantages to being near them, and there are also disadvantages to being near them. When your candle is lit, the tiles that are one space away from the tile where you are all illuminated, and you add them to the board by drawing them from the stack. And then if you move away from those, then they disappear. And this is the part that I think is really interesting. They don't stay in place. It's not like you flip them over so they're invisible, and then when you go back you can see them again. They actually disappear. That's what makes the maze kind of surreal and interesting, is that as you move away from a tile, it disappears, and if you were to go back in that direction, it changes. You draw a new tile. There are monsters in the maze that can hurt you and can knock out your candle. There are some collapsing tiles where if you go through that tile, it collapses, and then there's a hole there. And of course, if you move one away, that hole disappears too. But if you try to go back that way where you are, then you fall, and falling has its own effects. It's a nice balance of weird mechanisms to explore. The place where the Night Cage really shines is in its aesthetic. The art on the cover, when I first saw this game, there may even be an episode of the podcast where I was raving about it. I saw this game and it was an instant watch. The cover looks so cool. It's this hand holding this obscenely melting candle where the wax is running over the hand, and so you get this image of somebody so desperate that they're holding a melting candle in their hand. Genius. Looks super creepy. And then the art aesthetic itself shows these sort of emaciated people of indiscriminate age or gender crawling through these tunnels, and the tunnels are drawn sort of really creepy. Like, you get this feel of desperation that I think works really well. And then you have the tunnels that have cracks in them, which when you crawl into them, you know as soon as you leave, they're going to collapse into a hole, which means you can't go back that way. There are these monsters that are drawn surreal, kind of like nightmares, but pretty creepy looking, I think. And you have very little life, and you have to have everyone survive. So it sets up an excellent game. And I understand that if you play a few times, then there are these modules you can add in that add more compelling elements to it. But at its heart, what you're trying to do is find these keys and then all get to a gate together. And the challenge is each person can only carry one key, and you all have to find the same gate at the same time, which means that if you find a gate before you're ready, then either one person has to hang around that gate, constantly getting damaged, or, using up these bravery tokens that you use, or you have to move away from it and then you lose that gate, and you just better hope that you find a key before you find the other gate. And there are a limited number of keys as well. And there are enough of each that statistically most of the time you shouldn't be in a position where the grid of tiles can make you lose. But you absolutely could just lose because of the way the tiles come out. And that's not my favorite kind of game. I admit that happens occasionally in Pandemic, but it's exceedingly rare. And given the amount of ways that you can lose tiles or lose track of where you are, or different things that can happen to you when you're playing the Night Cage, it doesn't feel like it would be exceedingly rare to just get hosed by randomness in this game. Like I said, I haven't played the advanced modules yet, so it's possible that the additional elements introduced by those advanced modules would make the game more compelling. But as it was, I found the atmosphere pretty cool, but the gameplay pretty mediocre, which actually reflects, and I don't know, maybe this reflects badly on me as a reviewer, but it reflects what I expected. Like I said, when I saw the cover art for this game, I was deeply intrigued. And I went and I read the stuff about how it plays, and I was like, oh man, that sounds pretty random. And I hate to say that, I saw it was from Smirk and Dagger Games, and their gameplay styles are pretty random, not my favorite. And so I did not back it, but I'm glad I had the chance to play it at Toggle. And I think if someone else said, hey, I want to set up the Night Cage and give it a play, would you play with me? Yeah, I think I'd play. It was an amusing way to spend my time. I didn't actively hate it or anything, but it certainly is not the kind of game I would probably pick off the shelf to play, and I'm glad I didn't buy it myself. So that's the Night Cage from Smirk and Dagger Games. All right, the third game I got to play, it's always interesting to review a game like this because this is a classic game designed in, I believe, 1870, and a game I've just never really had a chance to try before, but Adam Zambrowski brought 2 of these boards to Toggle Gaming one evening to show them off, and I got a chance to play and was introduced to Crokinole. Crokinole is a dexterity game, perhaps the dexterity game or an early one, in which you are flicking discs on a big circular board. There is a ring in the middle that's worth 15 points, a little hole in the very center that's worth 20, and then there's a ring that outside of the inner ring that's worth 10, and another ring outside that's worth 5. The rules are pretty simple. The ring that's in the middle is surrounded by these pegs, so it's a little harder to get your disc in there. You have to start flicking from the side of the board. In fact, you have to start flicking from your side of the board. Each player has their own quadrant from which they can flick. And I guess if you're playing official tournament rules, you're seated while you're doing this, and you have to have at least one cheek on the chair is the rule, which I think is funny to have a rule related to butt cheeks. The board is ultra smooth, and there is this like gliding powder that you can use to make the discs move even more smoothly. With these rules, you have a relatively light burden in terms of remembering how to play. Basically, if on your turn the opponents don't have any discs on the board, you have to get your disc into the middle circle in order to leave it on the board, or you forfeit it. If your opponents do have at least one disc on the board, you have to hit their disc with your disc. Now, I can't remember if you could do a ricochet where you hit another disc and that disc hits theirs, if that's allowed, or if your disc directly has to hit theirs. But either way, you have to hit theirs in order to stay on the board. And then there's points added up at the end with eliminations there. So like in bags. So if if both teams scored 15 points by having one in the middle, you remove both of those and nobody scores anything for those discs. All in all, it's definitely one of those classic games for a reason. I can absolutely see a skill curve that would go all the way up to really, really high, but it's easy enough to play that you can do decently well on your first try just by having a go at it. When we played, the one person who brought the game, Adam, he was kind enough to play with his left hand, or his non-dominant hand, starting in the second game. So we were able to see one game where, seeing what it's like to have someone who's pretty experienced play, and then with him playing with his non-dominant hand, we at least had a chance to have some fun as well, or to do well as well. You know, I can absolutely see why people get really into Crokinole. It is very neat. It definitely is a game that allows for acquired skill. It feels different than other things, and it looks really nice. Like it just looks excellent on the table. It definitely is the kind of game that would be a lot of fun to have around. Part of me is really compelled at the idea that maybe I'd save up some money and buy a game. You know, I'm at the point in my game collecting, as you know, where I can be pretty choosy about what games I get, and my goal should be to remove games rather than acquiring them. So getting a nice Crokinole board to add that to my collection would sort of fill a niche that I don't really have very much of. But the reason I don't have very much in the way of dexterity games is my family doesn't like them. I mean, I think my son does, but my wife and daughter are not really very keen on them. So I don't know when this would get played. So then I would have a very nice, expensive Crokinole set that I'd never play, which doesn't feel great. So that's my hesitation in picking it up now. But I think definitely when Crokinole sets are around and I have the opportunity to play one, I'm definitely going to be trying it again, because it was a neat experience, and I can definitely see why people go crazy for it. So if you get a chance to play Crokinole, I definitely recommend, especially if you enjoy flicking games like like Flick 'em Up, or what's the other one I have? The Final Flick tier. Yes, if you have flicking games, I definitely would recommend. If you like flicking games, definitely recommend Crokinole as something to try. Well, that's about it for me today. Hopefully this episode turned out better than previous ones have, with my brand new lapel mic and my wind guard that I put on it. So hopefully it's not too blustery and there wasn't too much random noise from around. Head over to Board Game Geek Guild 3269 and let me know. Let me know what games you've been playing lately. I haven't heard from some of you in a while, so I'd love to hear an update. If you would like to reach out to me directly, you can email me, brendan@rattleboxgames.com, or you can email me through Board Game Geek using the username Wombat929. I like to play asynchronous games on Boitaju, Board Game Arena, and yukata.de. You can find me in all three of those places with the username Wombat929. Thanks for joining me on my walk today. I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.